podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
There will be no coronation, no crowning, and no sword of state on this podcast, we promise. This is Tennis Unfiltered.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
I'm James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. I've got our resident tennis coach Calvin Betton and our resident writer and broadcaster George Bellshaw here as well. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you for all your nice messages about last week's interview with Rick Macey. I really enjoyed doing it, and it was nice to see lots of various members of the national press, including one budding journalist at the Eye, James Gray, write up the quotes, which was nice to see our things go a little bit wider. And yes, as I say, thank you. We'll try and do more of that kind of thing. It's not always easy, as anyone who has tried to organise 3 people outside of work, it's hard enough getting us 3 in the room at the same time, as we very rarely do in reality. But yeah, we will try and do more of that. I know I've already had one coach text me saying, give the people what they want. I think he said he wanted more Calvin. I think he meant more of himself. But we'll get you on soon, Craig.
That wasn't me. I thought it was me.
No.
He did text me the same message, to be fair.
Yes, and then you texted me the same message within minutes of him texting me, actually. There's a real campaign going on from one coach to get on the podcast, so I'm sure that'll be happening sooner rather than later. We've got loads to talk about in the real tennis world, because we obviously had Madrid over the last week and a half and didn't really touch on it last week, so we'll also talk about news coming off the court, Rafa Nadal, Emma Raducanu as well. And we'll also talk about that challenger win in the south of France for Andy Murray. But I want to start, as we've tried to do recently, with a listener question. And it's Peanut, who I know for a fact is a big Nadal fan. And Peanut asks, now that Rafa has withdrawn from Rome, do you think he will play Roland Garros? And if he does, will he have a chance to win it? You are right, Peanut. He has withdrawn from Rome. Rafa said, despite having noticed improvement in recent days, there have been many months without having been able to train at a high level, and the readaptation process has its times, and I have no choice but to accept them and continue working. Un abrazo a todos, which means a hug to all. Georgia, I know what you said in your immediate reaction to that, but do you think this is the end of Rafa for the clay this year?
It's not looking great, is it? I've kind of thought all the way through this season he'd at least get one tournament under his belt before the French Open. Now I'm not so convinced he plays, and I think if he does play, it could be one of those where he doesn't last the distance. I mean, we've been down this route with Nadal so many times before that it'd be kind of weird to write him off, but I said, yeah, when the clay court season started, I said, I was less confident of him winning another slam. And, I think someone was asking us about the Olympics next year and how we feel about that. I mean, it all feels a little bit terminal to me at the minute for Nadal. And I hate to say that, and I hope I'm totally wrong, but it's last year felt like a huge problem. It felt like a huge effort to get him over the line, winning that French Open. And I don't really think he's been the same guy since. And the fact he's not made it to the line for any clay tournament before this year's French Open is doing little to sway me that something's going to miraculously change by then.
I'm trying to find whether he has ever gone into Roland Garros having played 0 clay court tournaments in the build-up. I'm just scrolling through Tennis Abstract, and I've got as far as 2005, and he has never had, he's usually had at least 3 tournaments. As you know, he has a great affinity for Rome, and he almost always plays there. Calvin, I know we often talk about how Rafa doesn't seem like someone who needs that match practice, but that is proof that he always has had it. He will be going into uncharted territory if he does play Roland Garros without that kick in.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of different this time. I think before it's maybe been like a scheduling thing, and whether he can, there's always been a plan that he would come back for injury for the major tournament. That would where it would be tapered into, even if he couldn't get a match in before it, but he'd come back there at full fitness. Now it just seems to be a week by week. Like, is he going to be fit to play? And the answer so far has always been no, hasn't it? So I think this is different ground there. What I'd be interested to see is that I think he's going to have quite a decision to make on it, because I don't see it. There's no way he's going to win it. There's no chance that's going to happen. He's not fit to play tennis yet, and we're 2 weeks away. Fit to play competitive tennis. So, and he, you know, I'm saying there's no chance he's going to win it. I'd say it's barely no chance. But so then you've got a decision to make. One, like, does he think this is the last time he's going to play it if he decides to? And if it is he willing to basically just do what Federer did at Wimbledon the year before last, where there's a chance he might get destroyed there. Like, if he comes, like, because where his seeding is, where his ranking is now, he could come across, like, Federer lost in the quarters, didn't he? But if he got Alcaraz in the quarters, I don't see any way that Alcaraz just wouldn't completely destroy him. And does he want to put himself through that? So then is he going to play it and risk that happening? Or is he not going to play it and risk never going there again? Because in that, you'd imagine that a year from now, he's going to be a year older. We still don't know where his body's going to be. So yeah, I think it's quite an important decision he's got to make.
Yeah, it's that question about legacy, isn't it? And people always ask me, what do you think so-and-so's legacy is? Do you think he'll ruin his legacy? I can't remember the exact person it was, but Pete Sampras lost very early on in his last Wimbledon, didn't he? And I can't say it's ruined his legacy, has it?
Wasn't it Federer who beat him?
It wasn't. I'm sure it was someone George seems to know.
No, I was just saying, I think Federer was the year before he actually kind of called it a day, Sampras. So that was like 2001, wasn't it? Then I think he was still around here.
I'm just trying to, because I was talking to someone about this the other day, and I was specifically remember Sampras going out very early. He lost to lucky loser George Bastille in 5 sets.
It's a bit different for Sampras though, because it didn't ruin his legacy, because he went and won the US Open. And that was his last ever tournament, was winning the US Open. So you can hardly go, he was past it, you know, turning up and he was past it. I think he just wasn't really in the best place at that Wimbledon, played terribly, but then came back and was phenomenal in the US Open, and never actually retired, just never played again. Yeah,
but then Roger Federer losing in the quarterfinals to Hubert Hurkacz, you know, getting bageled in his last ever set. Has that ruined? It's not ruined his legacy at all. I think he's won it 8 times.
I don't really think so. I mean, the other thing I kind of just say, broadly speaking, is I find it highly unlikely that's the mindset Nadal will necessarily be in right now. I still think, you know, knowing what he's like, it's just a question of, can I win this tournament? You know, am I ready to win this tournament? If I'm not ready to win this tournament, I won't play it. That's more the kind of conversation I think he has, to be honest. Like, and yeah, I mean, look, it wouldn't destroy his legacy. The bloke's won more French Opens than anyone outside the big three's ever won all the majors combined. I mean, that would be a ludicrous thing to lay on him.
Yeah, no one's going to go like, oh, what about this 13 times? How many has he won? 13?
Mm-hmm.
14, right?
Like,
14.
Yeah, what about those 14 French that Nadal won? Yeah, what about the one he lost? It's just, you know, but I do wonder, like, no, I entirely agree with George, but it's a bit different from Federer, because Federer wasn't so dominant at Wimbledon. Like, Nadal's entire French Open career is basically, he lost the one to Soderling, which was out of the blue. Then he lost one to Pete Djokovic, did he?
Yeah.
And then other than that, I think he's just pulled out the others. Like, I don't think anyone's...
He's only lost 2 matches, right? At Roland Garros.
I think only one other player's taken him to 5, and that was John Isner, unless there's been one more recently. And actually, was that in the French? Yeah, anyway.
It's an absurd record. I mean, I don't think... it's interesting, George, what you say. If he doesn't think he'll be able to win it, he won't play it. I'm not totally convinced by that. I mean, I know what you mean, and I don't think he's like Murray, where I think Murray has at times, like, sort of kidded himself into thinking he can play himself into the tournament, which I don't think is a thing. Like, I don't think you can come into a tournament 70% fit and then be 100% fit because you played more and tired yourself out. I just don't think it necessarily works like that. But I do think it's a different dynamic because it's later in his career. And while I appreciate that, I don't think he will be thinking, oh, this will be my last Roland Garros. He will be conscious that it'll be one of his last. Like, he must be. And if you give him the choice between never playing at Roland Garros again or losing like 3-2-1 in the first round, like, he would surely take playing one more match at Roland Garros. Like, I
don't think he would. I don't think he would.
Do you think?
No, I don't think any way he would. I think he'll
All
only
right, what
play...
about losing in 4 sets in the quarterfinals?
I don't think it's a case of, like, will he think he can win it? With his mentality, you never contemplate not winning it. What I think it's a straight... I don't think there is any grey area. It's just black and white with these players. And it's like, am I competitive? And that's if they think they back themselves. If I'm competitive, then put me on. He'll think put me on centre court. I'll get through the first couple of weeks. Put me on centre court against anybody, and if I'm competitive against them, I think I can get it done. And he's probably right in that.
Yeah, and let's be honest. You look at the rest of the field right now. The other guy who's been there and thereabouts the whole time over the recent years, who's proven he can beat Nadal at the French Open. He hasn't played a match either, really. You know, he's not ready. So there's one player in the field Nadal will be looking at the minute and thinking, can I realistically beat him? And that's Carlos Alcaraz. And that's the only one right now I think he would look at and still believe a half-fit version of himself couldn't beat on, you know, Philippe Chatrier. You know, that court is so good. He doesn't need to be perfect on that court. And the rest of the field isn't playing to that level on a clay court right now. So, yeah, I think if he can get himself feeling I can physically get through the first 4 matches and put myself in a position where Alcaraz or Djokovic knock each other out and I need to win a one-off match, I think he may be there. But I just actually think he's not going to be fit enough at all. I just can't believe something's going to change so dramatically that will make him feel he can even be that level of competitive right now.
I think as well, yeah, it's worth considering that last year he didn't look in any sort of form or shape, like before he played Djokovic. I remember, I think we did a pod, and I think we all backed Djokovic, looking at it going like, Nadal hasn't looked great, has he? You know, he probably was going to lose to Zverev, or he was going to be in a tight 5th set with Zverev, one way or another. And then, you know, he just comes out with it. He just keeps, you know, there's some sort of witchcraft happening on that court, isn't there, with it?
Yeah,
I mean, it helps getting Casper Ruud in the final, to be fair.
Yeah, and you know, I've mentioned it so many times, but Casper Ruud talked about it after that final, you know, and Nadal has an innate advantage because for almost everyone, they're doing it for the first time, and he's doing it for the 119th time, whatever it is. He has just so much more experience. They're playing different games, effectively.
I think as well, you know, you can't underestimate, and this is if he's physically fit, you can't underestimate in any sport the importance of the experienced serial winner. And I think if you look back on, like, Nadal's done it enough times himself, but if you look at guys like, remember Shane Warne, like in that Ashes series in 2005, he wasn't spinning the ball anywhere near as much as he did in his prime, or that kind of thing. He was basically doing the same ball, didn't have loads of variation. He was winning it all on aura, competitive charisma, and the theatre and pressure that he could build. And I think that's what those guys think. They basically think at that age, I think, what they think is just get me to 4-all. And I know I can apply enough pressure on these guys that they won't be able to live with it.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And the Warne comparison is good because, yeah, Shane Warne definitely at the end of his career picked up wickets just because people outthought themselves, just standing at the other end of the pitch.
Well, there was a story where I think Kevin Peterson said it in one of his books that basically he's whacking Warne for 6 and Adam Gilchrist behind's going, oh, the ball, Warne, like just trying to convince him that he's got lucky by hitting this 6, and it was really just Ross. But yeah, I do think there's an element of that with Nadal. You know, He's not what he was. Like, he's way past his prime as an actual physical athlete. But we're here talking about, look, we're proving the point right here. The guy can't play tennis at the minute, and we're saying can he win a tournament in 2 weeks' time?
Well, it was funny, Calvin. I won't name the player, but a story you told the other week about someone talking about Nadal specifically, and the noise that he makes on the court, and the physical intimidation of facing him is so much part of it. And I thought that was really interesting that even now, 20 years later, he's still got all of that.
I think, Nadal only needs to look back as well to kind of the last Australian Open he won. He arrived into that tournament without really playing. By his own admission, he didn't feel fit. I actually, I suspect he was in a far better condition there than he is right now. And then he's still gone and beaten the second best player there's been on a hard court over the last 2 years just by sucking him in. I mean, he should never have won that match. And it's just the fact he's been there so many times and knows how to hang around. So, yeah, I think he's proved time and time again, if you give him a sniff in a big match, he can win it. It's just, as we've said time and time again, is his body actually going to allow him to get on that start line in the first place? I think that's the biggest challenge for now. If he plays, I'll back him to get to the quarterfinals minimum, to be honest. That's just what he's like. He's so hard to beat there.
That said, and George, you mentioned him, Carlos Alcaraz is the man in the field who he has to be fearing, because Carlos Alcaraz won another title this week. He won the final in Madrid. Roger Federer wasn't there, but he was in Miami watching the F1, and someone said, what if Nadal misses the French? He says it would be brutal. It would be tough for tennis if Rafa isn't going to be there. I still hope so. Obviously, Novak hasn't been playing that much, so I hope he's going to be strong as well. And then all the young guys coming through as well, I'll be watching, that's for sure. I think all the young guys is pretty generous when, as far as I can tell, there's only one young guy, and he's 20 years old, as we all know from the enormous birthday cake. But we won't get into birthday cakes quite yet. I know everyone's desperate to talk about them. But we should talk about the tennis first, as we so rarely do. He beat Jan-Lennard Struff in the final, who did actually manage to take a set of him, something that only Emil Rusevori was the other player to do so in Madrid. It means Alcaraz has now won his last 2 tournaments. He's unbeaten on clay this year. He will go to Rome, as far as we know. He's due to play on Friday, I think, but I wouldn't be totally surprised if he pulls out. Calvin, we talk a lot about conditions in Madrid, and we've spoken about altitude before and the rest of it. I don't think it matters what the conditions are with Carlos Alcaraz at the moment, does it? I mean, he just smashes everyone in sight.
Yeah, I mean, he's the best player in the world at the minute, and I know George might still disagree as to who the best player in the world is, but I don't think there's any doubt at the minute best player in the world is, just because we haven't seen Djokovic play. We don't know what kind of form he's in or what kind of physicality he's in. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. I think where you see it matters more is the fact that Struff making the final. That's where the altitude plays more of a part, I think. And what's his name? Karatsev making the semis. I think that's, Madrid is quite unique. It does have really unique conditions. As somebody pointed out, though, it's strange. It's not actually that high.
No, it's only about 1,000... 1,500 feet, maybe.
Yeah, maybe something like that. Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah, it's not Mexico City levels, or that place where is it? Bolivia
Quito.
Play all their
Quito. Yeah,
Bolivia play all their football matches. We're not talking about that kind of stuff.
La Paz in Bolivia. That's right.
Yeah. So but yeah, it's definitely the highest Masters or Slam that we play.
He just to run you through his run in case you missed it. Rusevori, Dimitrov, Alexander Zverev 1 and 2, Khachanov in straight sets, Coric in straight sets, and then Struff in what was actually a pretty decent final. Alcaraz was pretty distressed. I mean, you saw him. He looked, for the first time in a long time, George. He looked, stressed. I thought.
I don't think he played very well, to be honest, until actually kind of critically around that kind of early stage of the third set, where he just kind of got that break. And I think that's arguably the most important thing we see from Alcaraz at the minute, is that he does seem to just handle the matches very, very well. We're talking about Nadal fancying himself at 4-all in big matches. Alcaraz, he wasn't on it. He wasn't. Struff was really kind of dominating when he was coming into the net, and you're kind of half expecting, Alcaraz is going to pass him way more than he actually was in reality. Just kept kind of putting it on his racket. Struff played really well. I'm not taking anything away from him, but just the quality of Alcaraz, you kind of expect him to find his range a lot quicker. But when it really mattered, he suddenly did, and when it really mattered, Struff missed some key volleys, and that's ultimately the difference between a player like Alcaraz and Struff. Struff can play a great match, he can put in a big level performance, but Alcaraz is special, and he's going to win lots of matches where he doesn't play well, but he wins those big points in the biggest moments, and his opponent will feel the heat.
I think what's important as well is kind of noting on the joke I made on Federer's comment is and Calvin, you kind of alluded to it with a few rogue faces in the latter stages of the Madrid Open. The men's draw absolutely fell apart. I mean, in a way that we've come to associate with the WTA in recent years. Like, there were 2 lucky losers and a qualifier in the quarterfinals. Struff himself lost in qualifying. Zhang Zhizhen, who is a rising star, I'm sure, but is not someone that we've associated with those latter stages of any big tournaments, and is really only quite new in the top 100. He made the quarters as well. Even Stefanos Tsitsipas made the quarterfinals, for God's sake. And he's only got one shoulder, we're told. So I think it's just worth noting that in a sea of people melting away, Carlos Alcaraz is the one constant that even when everything is bad, he is still good. I've sort of run out of things to say about Carlos Alcaraz because until he loses, I don't know how much more I'm going to learn about him. But as you say, he didn't play particularly well. And there is something to be learnt from the fact that he did pull himself out of that, George.
Yeah, I think the result that I found kind of most interesting as always was sort of the Zverev one, because I was starting to think, Zverev just turned someone over 6-1, 6-love. Is he starting to kind of find his game again? And then he turns up, gets absolutely hammered by Alcaraz. It just wasn't even close. He's just thinking, oh, God, this time last year, this is the guy who took him out the French Open. And the gap is so horribly far since then. Like, who's genuinely going to lay a glove on this guy at the French Open if Djokovic and Nadal aren't there? I mean, if those guys don't turn up, you may as well give him the title right now. In my percentage terms, he'll be up to about 80%, I think.
Oh, God, that again. Great. Calvin, have you got anyone in mind who you think can take chunks out of Alcaraz apart from Djokovic and Nadal?
I mean, the only one I think is the player I think he'd still think he's going to win, but the player I think he probably wants to avoid is Sinner, just because he's beaten him this year at a big tournament, and he's beaten him at slams before, and he's had match points in. I think they've only played at slams twice. Sinner's won one and had match point in the other one. So it does seem like he's the closest to being able to challenge him regularly.
It's the only match that feels like a proper rivalry with Alcaraz at the minute, and that's by virtue of him not playing Djokovic enough, having a good record against Medvedev. This just feels like the match that, and Sinner isn't as consistent elsewhere, even though I think he's he's one of the few players this year to have a win rate of 80% or higher. But yeah, it does feel on a knife edge. I'm not sure it'll last that way throughout their career unless Sinner kind of makes a few more strides. But right now, it certainly feels like close to a 50-50 match you get with them.
Having said all that, we thought Alcaraz was going to win it last year, and he ended up going out pretty tamely to Zverev, didn't he? So, although Zverev was playing very well then, so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I saw the weirdest thing was I saw someone this week on Twitter saying that if what was it? If Tsitsipas had have managed to play someone else other than Djokovic in the finals, as like Alcaraz has, they could have had a similar career. And I was like, no, because Alcaraz is just miles better than Tsitsipas.
And also, the gradient is completely different. Like, Tsitsipas has been around for a long time. Well, not a long time, but...
No, he was saying that when he plays in the finals of slams, he keeps playing Djokovic. And
Well, he's played two final slams
yeah.
and played Djokovic twice. So
But also, I think also a major factor in that debate would be that Alcaraz doesn't have a shit backhand. So, but it could be the draws. Could be the draws.
As Tsitsipas found out to his chagrin. I don't buy that. Also, it's that nonsense argument. If my grandmother had balls, she'd have been my grandfather. And Andy Murray played Novak Djokovic in 9 Grand Slam finals. And to be fair, I do sometimes hold that up and say, yeah, but he could have been a lot better. But I just give him credit for being in the final.
It's weird now, isn't it? Just quickly there, George, just going a bit off topic there, that if, there was always the debate as to, Tsitsipas, Zverev, Felix, those guys with how many slams. I think there's a really solid chance now that none of them win any. And that would be crazy, like a lost generation there of, not generation, but a lost sort of
a little cohort.
Of the players who we thought would be the real next big things. And I think there's a fair chance that none of them win one.
The only shred of hope I would also give to the rest of the field, if we're allowed to still give them any possible hope, is this guy has only been past the quarterfinals of a Grand Slam once. I mean, it's not like he's turned up to every single slam and smashed it. It's just happened to be the case that he didn't play Australia since winning his first one and has since come back to smash it. But there is something to be said for a slam is bigger than every other tournament. I know Calvin hates the old, you have to wait an extra day to play sort of thing, but he does feel a bit of a rhythm player to me, Alcaraz, in some senses. And the US Open, he had some bad matches there, really. I mean, he could have lost some to Sinner and Tiafoe, which I know is a bit of a boring thing to say, but they weren't matches. They were matches you went into them thinking Alcaraz is just going to walk through and beat them because he's better. And okay, he did come through them, and that's very good and well done. But it's not like he has been rolling through slams year after year after year. That hasn't happened yet.
It's only 20 today,
we expect
George.
it. I know. But I'm just saying, I'm trying to give a tiny bit of hope to the rest of the field because I don't want to write off the French Open just yet, despite saying I give it about 80% chance for him.
They're also like maybe about sort of 17, 18 years ago, there was probably somebody a couple of months after Nadal had won his first French Open going, worth noting that this guy's only been past the last 8 of a slam once.
Well, quite. Stat alert on Carlos Alcaraz. He's now won his first 4 Masters 1000 finals, which is a pretty impressive achievement, I think you'll agree. He's only the 3rd man ever to do it. Can anyone take a stab at the other 2? Who incidentally both won their first 5.
Nadal?
Not Nadal.
He lost to Federer, didn't he, in Miami or something? I think quite early in his career.
Outrageous piece of knowledge, George. Very good. But do you have any? One of them is often touted as he's got a couple of youngest ever records, I think. No? All right, well, play along at home if you can think of any. I will come back with the answer a bit later in the podcast. Because
is Rios one of them?
It's not Rios, unfortunately.
You'd have thought Federer would have had a decent chance, wouldn't you? Just from the perspective of it was kind of a weaker period, whereas Nadal, Djokovic coming through would have likely been playing Federer and losing them. So they feel less likely, but... Yeah. I'm guessing it's not him.
No, it's not. It's not. Have a think at home, and let us know on Twitter.
Was it Becker?
No, it wasn't Becker. No. No, not McEnroe. Let us know on Twitter at @unfiltertennis if you do end up getting the answers right. I will tell you the answers, and you could also just look them up because the tennis channel very kindly tweeted this stat. But it's always a bit of fun, bit of quiz fun. Right, moving on. I think we probably should. I did mention Zhang Zhizhen having a good week, and Calvin also alluded in other circumstances to Aslan Karatsev, who made it through to the semi-finals. And I have to say, it was rolling back the years, Aslan Karatsev, like Australia 2021. That run, I thought it was quite good fun to watch, and I suppose the conditions probably do suit him a bit more. I mean, Calvin, I don't want to go over old ground because we talked a lot about Aslan Karatsev a couple of years ago, but obviously we've not really seen him do anything significant on clay, and semi-finals in Madrid is reasonably significant. I mean, should we just not be paying attention to it and saying this is what happens when he gets hot?
I mean, I think there's a few reasons as to why he suddenly started playing well and hasn't been playing well, that we probably can't get into. But I'm also loath to give him much credit, because I was talking to somebody this week who told me he's probably the most unpleasant tennis player on tour. And
that's quite a claim, that is.
Yeah.
A couple of stories nothing that he's done has gone close to what Alex Zverev has allegedly done, but just being around the practice courts and being around the tournaments, apparently he's not a very pleasant person. So yeah, and also the other stuff, which I think it's best to leave aside.
Yeah, you can go and find other stories about Aslan Karatsev if you want to. You can Google them, or if you follow Yannick Schneider on Twitter, he has tweeted about them as well. Let's move on before we libel anyone.
We've been in the press this week for good reasons. Let's not make it the other way around.
Yes, quite. Well, maybe we should get someone in trouble in Madrid. Let's talk about the tennis first of all. Aryna Sabalenka beat Iga Swiatek to claim the Madrid title. It was a pretty fiercely fought final, I would suggest. I saw Eleanor Crooks, the Press Association tennis correspondent, who will also be my roommate in Paris, excitingly, saying that there was no love lost in that match between those two. I don't think that's a surprise. Sabalenka is obviously from Belarus. Iga Swiatek is obviously from Poland and has been very vocal on the war. Do your own research on that. I'm not going to sit here and say things about Aryna Sabalenka, but you can find them out if you want to. Either way, she won, and there is a very clear storyline emerging, George, in the WTA. Like we have a sort of narrative.
Yeah, we have 3 players who are actually playing really well consistently all year, and 2 of them have carried that on into the clay, which is great. I would still have a note of caution over how significant this result will be in the context of the French Open, largely due to the different conditions and the fact that Swiatek played Sabalenka in other clay conditions a week or 2 ago and thumped her in straight sets. I would still back Swiatek in the conditions there will be at kind of Roland Garros, but this is still another good win. It's another good sign for Sabalenka, who I think, she won't talk about it that much, I'm sure, but she will fancy herself to be world number 1 this year. And she's already got a bit of a lead there, I think, at the moment. In the race, that is. But yeah, she's playing great tennis and she's playing consistently. And I think, to be fair to Sabalenka, of all the players we've say haven't been consistent over the years, she actually has. She has been a top 8 player for a long time. She has won a lot of titles at WTA level. That's just not translated to Grand Slams. So she's changed the consistency of the Grand Slam, hopefully at the start of this year. If she brings that along with her tour form the rest of the time, then she will be world number 1, because she's been fairly consistently brilliant outside of slams for years. So yeah, I think this is really encouraging. It'd be a great final if we got this again, or, if Rybakina's going deep as well, that will be good too. Women's tennis suddenly, after a couple of years of really getting annoyed with it, you can't really knock these women at the top of the game now. They're doing really, really well. And
we have to remember, and I know, we don't always talk about just the tennis on this podcast. That's, I think, part of the reason people like listening. And I'm not going to shy away from the fact that there is a very obvious subplot to it all, which is, as I say, Swiatek being a very, very ardent supporter of Ukraine. She wears the ribbon on her hat in her French Open winner's speech last year. The thing she focused on the most was talking about Ukraine. Aryna Sabalenka is Belarusian, was previously banned from Wimbledon because of her nationality. She did have a pre-season training camp in Russia before the Australian Open in Ufa, I believe. And Elena Rybakina was born in Moscow, and her parents are Muscovites, and I believe still live there. Now, I know she represents Kazakhstan, and I'm not making personal slights against her, but it all creates a wider narrative. And I think, importantly, it shines a light on, A, women's tennis, which we want to shine a light on, and B, the war in Ukraine, which I think it's quite important to keep shining a light on. Because if these players were from America and Great Britain and Brazil, I know for a fact that the 3 of us wouldn't talk about the war as much. And I know for a fact I wouldn't get the newspaper interested in having stories about the war quite as much.
Britain would probably swap anyone in the top 100 though, rather than a world number one at the minute, right?
Yeah, we'll take anything, quite frankly, at the moment. Harriet Dart won a title this week, but unfortunately it was in Nottingham, not in Madrid.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, James, in that and I think the proof of that is that no one is talking about Peng Shuai anymore, are they?
Yeah.
So and that still hasn't been resolved. But
No.
we're actually going back there to play tournaments there. And as somebody, I was on this point out the other day. The WTA didn't actually boycott anything in China.
Correct. Yeah, they didn't miss any tournaments. There have been no ATP tournaments in China since the WTA announced their boycott either. So, yes, and I suspect if there was a Chinese player in the top 10, that we would talk about it pretty constantly.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's our fault as media, and that we should be a bit more kind of spinal in how we report and what we report on. But there's also an extent to which we are driven by what people are willing to talk about and wants to read about and listen to. And for whatever reason, the way the human brain is, it's sort of monkey see, monkey do. If you can put it in front of them and relate it to something that's on the TV, then you can kind of create a whole story around it. I mean, I'm not saying create a story, but you can get people to read about it, which, it's kind of the game now. It maybe used to be when everyone bought a newspaper because they had to. It was the only way to find out about the news. You could write about whatever you wanted on page 79 of the Daily Mail or the Daily Express or the Guardian, but can't really do it like that anymore. You need to be a bit cleverer, and it makes it harder to shine light on certain things. So I think when we have an opportunity to do it, like when you've got a Russian-born woman, a Belarusian-born woman, and a Polish-born woman all contesting tennis at the very top, and all having various different opinions and viewpoints on the conflict, let's bloody talk about it. I'm not going to apologise for that. Anyway, I was going to say we should talk more about the tennis, but I suppose just before we move on to birthday cakes, Calvin, Aryna Sabalenka winning in Madrid. She says she likes the conditions there, as you would expect. She's, I guess, she's a pretty good version of Alexander Zverev on the WTA, in that she's had some pretty big second serve problems, but now has a pretty big first serve and always has. Is there a chance that she can, because the WTA maybe it's not as different on the clay of Roland Garros, decent chance of converting that kind of form into French Open form?
Well, definitely. I think I'd have her and Swiatek joint favourite at the minute. I think that purely because I think that's how many times in a row has she beaten Swiatek now?
Great question.
She lost to her like last week.
Oh, the week before. But I think she's definitely like 3-1 in their last. She's got the advantage for sure in the matches.
It's three. There you go. It's 3-5 head to head. Swiatek against Sabalenka. Sabalenka has won 2 of the last 3, including a WTA finals semi-final, which is obviously significant. So at quite high level. But that's a positive head to head, not in terms of actual ratio, but that they've got quite an even head to head. I think is.
Yeah, I think head to heads are a bit strange. I think you've got to take the head to head. You can't take it over the last 3 years because Swiatek was playing a lot better back then, and Sabalenka has hugely improved in the last year. So I think it's really worth looking at just those last 3 tell a better tale, and then you've obviously got to have Raducanu in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one caveat I would put on it is Aryna Sabalenka has never been past the 3rd round of the French. And I know she's a different player now. And, she had never won the Australian Open before. And, you have to do something for the first time. But I think it just takes a few percentage points off, to borrow a Bellshawism, if I'm allowed to. Right, let's move on to birthday cake, because that's all anyone really wants to talk about. People may have seen Vika Azarenka tweeting about this. Carlos Alcaraz turned 20 in Madrid, and the tournament director Feliciano Lopez and his cronies, I should use a better word than cronies, but I'm using it, his
the
friends, the cabal. You sound like Dicker there, George. They brought on an enormous birthday cake, and everyone sang happy birthday, or feliz cumpleaños, as I believe it is in Spanish. It was also Aryna Sabalenka's birthday during the tournament, and they got her a smaller birthday cake, and there was no ceremony on court. Vika Azarenka tweeted about this. She quoted a tweet about the cake and said, this is exactly the treatment, or words to that effect. I haven't got the tweet in front of me. I noted that today's big thing on tennis Twitter was the size of birthday cakes and how absurd that was. It was pointed out to me that there were lots of other sexism rows in Madrid. The ball girls were all dressed in increasingly short skirts, which were rapidly replaced later on in the tournament by sort of baggy capri pants. They were Rafa Nadal length, but much less tailored, I would suggest. So they actually looked utterly crap because they were presumably incredibly hastily put together. And then to sort of top it all off on, I think it was Saturday, in the women's doubles final, which was won by Victoria Azarenka and her partner as they beat Coco Gauff and Jessica Pegula, there were no speeches afterwards. And initially, I tried to give it the benefit of the doubt because Coco Gauff went on Twitter and said, here's what I want to say in my speech, but I wasn't allowed to make one. And I thought, well, maybe the losers didn't do a speech. And then I went back and watched the feed. And no, the winners and the losers did not do a speech. I thought, well, maybe there weren't speeches in the doubles matches. So I went and checked the men's doubles, which Khachanov and Rublev won against, I think, Bapana and Eden and Ebden, sorry. And both teams in that final were allowed to make speeches. And I contacted the tournament in good journalistic practice and said, oh, I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this. And they have given me no reasonable explanation. Which leads me to the only logical conclusion, which is that they didn't want to give Victoria Azarenka a microphone in front of a crowd when they knew she was pretty pissed off with tournament organisers. I mean, does anyone want to challenge me on that? Because I can't find a more logical explanation.
I mean, that one I think is undefendable, really, to be honest. And some of the other stuff you mentioned there, I mean, not the ball girls, but the cake, I can find some context around that makes me feel more okay with that, and the fact that this is a young Spanish boy they're trying to build up to be a massive star in their country for years. I can understand why they might want to make that a slightly different show in Madrid.
And also, it's fucking cake. Like, there are enough actual legitimate feminist, misogynistic issuis that we can talk about without making ourselves look like morons by complaining about a size of cake.
But this is, I mean, you're essentially robbing the voices of people who've triumphed at your tournament. That makes no sense. I'd find it baffling to believe that they were that worried about what Azarenka was going to say that they just ripped it away from her. That feels incredibly petty. And if they were thinking that, I promise you, no one would have picked it up. Like, it would have been so small fry in comparison to what they've actually done now, which makes it look like some weird cover-up conspiracy theory. It's just amateur hour, really. There's no two ways about it, and people are absolutely right to be pissed off about that one. And then when you couple in stuff like the cake, which, as you say, it's not that important, but when it all comes together, it does. People will, start to think there is a big pattern there, and there is a big problem, and that they should hammer the tournament.
I think it's called a pattern of behaviour. I think that's what it builds up. And look, the Madrid Open is equal prize money, which is obviously a positive. But I think that might be the only way in which it's an equal. And the thing is, there's always something in Madrid, isn't there? Like last year, we had that absurd situation where Alexander Zverev finished at about 3 a.m. and then had to come back and play his next match at midday. And there were a couple
final.
It's not just a match; it was the final. And there are a couple of bits of shoddy scheduling there as well. So somehow something always happens in Madrid. I don't know. I'm sure Feliciano Lopez is learning on the job, and he'll work it out eventually. Maybe. I don't know. Spanish tennis tournaments, eh? What are you going to do? Shall we move on to Emma Raducanu, who put what I thought actually was quite a moving post on Instagram this week. I was slightly pissed off because I was, if I'm honest, getting ready to leave the office, and it then dropped onto my desk.
It's amazing how often that happens. Every time you think you're done for the day.
Yeah. But she said, it's safe to say the last 10 months have been difficult as I dealt with a recurring injury on a bone of both hands. I tried my best to manage the pain through it for the most of the year, and end of last year by reducing practice, slowed dramatically, missing weeks of training, as well as cutting last season short to try and heal it. Unfortunately, it's not enough. So she's now going to have, well, in fact, she already has had surgery on her right hand. She's also taking the opportunity, because she's going to be out for 4 months anyway, to have surgery on her left ankle, which, if you remember, was the one that she injured in Auckland before the Australian Open. She will eventually have surgery on her right hand. You'll notice that we're not talking about her wrists, it's her hands. It was just kind of easier to say wrists while no one was allowed to know what was going on. In fact, the injury, there's a very good diagram in the Telegraph showing the kind of these sort of bone spurs, I guess. They're not technically bone spurs, but they've grown on the top of her hand, on both hands, and when she whips her forehand, the tendons sort of snap over them, and it's incredibly painful. So she's going to have those fixed. I'm reliably informed that all 3 of the surgeries are pretty straightforward, and that they're not expecting, I mean, you never do expect, but they're confident that it'll be relatively straightforward to fix all of these problems. You already have seen pictures of her with her right arm in plaster. She's also already had the ankle operation just a couple of days later. Calvin, you know players who've been through surgery. I mean, 4 months is obviously, I'm told she's not even really potentially going to be on a tennis court until September, which, you know, is a long layoff. It's obviously a psychologically challenging thing as well as a physically challenging one.
Yeah, I imagine so. Well, I mean, Luke, who I coach, was out for a similar amount of time last year. He was out from injury to surgery to back on match court. It was about 6 months, so about 5 months. So I guess similar.
Well, what's it like when, like, you're obviously still working as his coach, but there's not a lot you can do in that period. Like, how much do you talk? How much do you plan? Are you checking in just to make sure he's all right?
Well, I mean, Luke, I've known Luke years, so we're friends anyway. So
yeah.
we'd still chat every day, regardless. But he was quite. I mean, it's quite lucky for him because Luke's girlfriend at the time was on a secondment in Australia, so he basically had the operation and then went to Australia for a couple of months. But it's, for a player, it's brutal. It's the worst part, and I've been injured myself when I was, you know, way down the tennis ladder when I was trying to play. Then, you know, there's nothing worse than being injured because you can't do anything. You're just that, you know, your job. It's not like another job where you can just do other things. If you've injured a part of your body, that I mean, I guess with Emma, if it was just her hands, then she could do a bit of physical work. But, you know, it does make sense to get both operations done at the same time. So you basically, it's just the boredom that will kill you. But yeah, I'm sure she's got, you know, it might be, you know, you look at for positives, and, you know, she gets to spend a bit of time with her friends maybe and that kind of thing. That, you know, spend some time at home that I doubt she gets to do very often. So, and, you know, in the big scheme of things, it's not a huge length of time out, if we're honest. Even if she misses the US Open, it's, you know, you're back in at her age. Say you're back and you've cleared up two problematic injuries, and you've missed 6 months out of early on in your career. You'd probably shake hands on that and take it.
George?
Yeah, I think that the positives Calvin's alluding to are probably the main things you can take from it. I mean, she's had a rare piece of universal positive coverage, which I suppose has been nice of her. That's not really something she's had for a period. Although there was a very curious headline in the Telegraph that was "Lay off Emma Raducanu. If you want to help her, buy a Porsche," which just felt a very strange.
I assume that wasn't one of Briggsy's pieces.
It wasn't. No.
I think she's on commission.
I don't really. I'm just not really sure what he was going for there. But anyway, look,
I mean, if her agent has got her that deal, like with the commission, like, that's a phenomenal deal.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for her taking stock, but I mean, at the same time, I feel she's there've been a few periods recently where I thought she might have done that and then come back and it suddenly be kind of okay. But we don't really know how long this has been going on for, or maybe this is the thing that sorts out and it'll suddenly be rosy again. And maybe she's been kind of dodging it in the court a bit because her hands are hurting. And maybe she's not looking that physically good because her ankle's hurting or whatever. So, we can hope that the player who won the US Open is going to be storming back round the corner at some point in 2024 and is mentally renewed and refreshed. So yeah, I think it's hard. You never want to say there's a positive in going away having 3 surgeries. That doesn't really sound that positive on the face of it, but silver linings where we can get them, I think, is the outlook for this one.
Yeah, I wrote a piece actually coincidentally a week ago saying Emma Raducanu should miss the French Open and who knows, maybe even Wimbledon, just to get away from it all.
Insider knowledge. He knew it was coming. He knew it was coming.
Yeah, as if. Heaven forbid I actually break a story, George, only by accident because I've dropped it. And yeah, I think it will actually might end up being the making of her, because the reality is she's out for 4 months, but she's effectively out for 7 months because she will miss the US Open almost certainly, which means that she'll just maybe play a couple of tournaments, at the back end. She might go and play Cluj, although that may not exist actually anymore, that tournament. She might go to China, for example, as part of her comeback, which would be extremely lucrative, obviously, given her cachet in that particular country. And she'll enjoy that. I think she probably would really enjoy the opportunity to go and play in China and the country of her mother, obviously. And then take, obviously, the rest of the year off and get ready for Australia. I remember her saying, it was potentially after the 2021 season, that she went on holiday, I think, to the Bahamas, and she said it was like her first proper holiday for years. Which you can imagine when you look at the way her career has been. She's always done exams. She's always been academically pretty rigorous. And then obviously summer is big tennis time in the UK especially. So I can kind of imagine that she's had very little time off in her life. And now the opportunity... I've already noticed she's been a lot more active on social media and that some of that has been a lot more kind of relaxed and kind of playful than it has been previously, because also she has obligations commercially that she obviously has to fulfill on social media. And I don't know, it was really sad when she had that horrible interview in Madrid where she just didn't say anything, and obviously that was, I think, because she knew what was coming. And I wonder if we might just see a bit more of Emma Raducanu. Like, she's obviously been dealing with this for nearly a year, and I wonder if it's kind of made her shut down. Like, I remember in Australia when she was dealing with the ankle, watching her practice, she was just she hated it. Like, she hated practicing because she was like, well, my ankle's not right, I can't do it properly, like, this is crap, I can't play my best tennis. And that must be a horrible feeling when you can't go into a press conference and say, look, back off, my ankle's really sore, because you don't want to give your opponent that information, right? So you can't walk in and say, you just leave me alone, like, I'm not fit, my hands hurt every day, I can't practice for more than an hour, even though I want to, because I really like hitting tennis balls, and when I do it too much, it hurts. I can't run around properly because my ankle hurts, but please leave me alone. So I kind of have a lot of sympathy for her, and think that 3 or 4 months of not having to do it, and hopefully, fingers crossed, everything crossed really, she will come back and be a much stronger player and a much happier person because of it. And that's partly just from a kind of general human compassion point, but also from the viewpoint of British tennis, Calvin, because we are now, I think actually Raducanu is going to go up in the rankings next week, potentially, just because of the fluctuations, which means she might be back in the top 100. But after that, obviously, there's Jodie Burrage, who will probably be British number 1 fairly soon, who you obviously know Craig very well, who coaches her. But there isn't a lot of strength in depth. I mean, I mentioned Harriet Dart, who won the title in Nottingham this week, which is a 25k, I think, which, good for her. But when the effective British number 2 is winning 25k's, it doesn't speak to a lot of depth going on, does it?
No, and I think Dan Evans had some pretty strong thoughts on that during the week, didn't he?
Yeah, he basically said that he didn't think British players were playing enough. I think only Dart has played double figures tournaments this year. I think she's played 12. I mean, is that like, where do you stand on that? Is more tournaments better?
Yeah. I mean, I do broadly agree with Evo on that. I mean, I don't know if you meant all the British players or just the females. I know that, that the men have actually played quite a lot. I think I went down them the other day in the men's top 25, and they've played quite a lot of tournaments. The girls, for one reason or another, just haven't. And he's right. There was one part of the interview where he said that there's this fixation with resting, and now I see a lot of players now saying that they'll put something on social media and it's like that battery emoji said time for a recharge. They're always recharging like a 5-year-old iPhone. You've got to be battle hardened. You've got to play. It's like you keep going, we're doing a training, we're doing a training block and this kind of thing. You've got to play tennis. That's where you get better. Like playing the game, putting yourself in competitive situations. And, if you're in Emma Raducanu's position and you're winning US Opens, maybe you don't have to. But, the rest of them, what's the problem with getting out there and going, I'm going to play every week. I'm going to play, not every week, I'm going to do 6 weeks in a row, and then I'll have a week or two off. Then I'm going to do another 6 in a row. This idea of 1 week off and then, I find it absolutely bizarre that no one played the week after the Billie Jean King Cup. They played 2 matches in a week, and you're saying we need a week off after that. Come on.
Yeah, I think besides the very valid point about getting yourself in competitive positions, there's also probably a bit of a numbers game, isn't there? That the more tournaments you throw yourself into, the more chance it'll be one of those weeks where it goes your way and someone pulls out and you get into a quarterfinal and suddenly you've got 50 points rather than the 0 points you wouldn't have, and then you build up and up and up and you get that confidence, you see your ranking go up and you get in better positions whatever tournaments you're in. So
I think Jodie's played a lot. I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but I think she must have played quite a lot just to get there.
And of them all, it feels like, I don't have the numbers in front of me either, but it's felt like she's been playing fairly consistently for a long time, and you can see that improvement that's been happening with her ranking. It's been going slowly, surely. Whereas a lot of the other players, it's felt some of them have had really good bursts and had really good moments, and then it's just felt like the momentum stop. And there's different reasons around that. I don't want to slaughter them all. There have been injuries, there have been other problems, but I think as a British tennis fan, you just have to be a bit disappointed, really, because when I was in the kind of early years of my kind of tennis journalism career, long ago that was, I remember we were writing articles about, look at this cluster of young British tennis players who are all on the cusp of the top 100 and they're playing really well at the Billie Jean King Cup. And, this is before Raducanu was actually kind of on the scene there. You had Konta kind of leading the way. You had Watson kind of having a good start to the year in Australia or whatever. You had Bolter winning some quite impressive matches at a young age and putting in some big performances. You had Dart, who's been into kind of Grand Slam through qualifying and whatever. And you think, this is feeling quite good. And you got this whole, we're pushing each other to be even better because we all want to be the best British tennis player. And you kind of fast forward on, I don't want to put a year on that when that sort of article would have been written poorly. But 4 years or whatever, and you'd find it really hard to make a case that that environment they claimed was being cultivated has gone anywhere in the direction it could and perhaps should have done.
Yeah, I can't really argue with that, and the results, I'm afraid, speak for themselves. Fingers crossed that things go up and up, and it'll be good to talk to Craig Veal at some point about Jodie's progress, because she's obviously been going forwards rather than backwards, which it seems much of British tennis seems to be doing at the moment when fit. Speaking of British tennis and going forwards, Andy Murray has his hands on a clay court title for the first time in 7 years. Hasn't won one since the Rome Masters. I can't say that the Aix-en-Provence Challenger title is on the same level as the Rome Masters, but a title is a title. It's his first one since Antwerp in 2019. His first Challenger title since Binghamton in 2005, which is a record as the longest gap between Challenger titles at 17 years and 9 months or something, breaking David Ferrer's record of 16 years. So
I was hoping you were going to ask the quiz question on that.
I'm sorry. But you have reminded me, George. I can go back and give you the answer to the quiz question that I asked you earlier before we get stuck into Andy Murray. Carlos Alcaraz has won his first 4 Masters 1000 titles. Only 3 men have done that. They are Jim Courier and Michael Chang, the only 2 other men, and they both won their first 5 Masters finals. So we wait with interest. Carlos Alcaraz, by the way, says he's going to play Rome, so maybe we'll see him make it 5-0 there, which would certainly cement him as favourite for the French Open. Murray beat Tommy Paul in Sunday's final. I watched every shot of this match, which is pretty rare, I have to say, just because of journalistic endeavours. And he came from behind. It didn't start well. He went 4-love down and then rallied, seemed to get used to the conditions a bit more, went and had a couple of rackets restrung at £58, which is £58 heavy, Calvin?
£58 is quite heavy, yeah. These days. Heavier than average, I would say.
Some people find that stuff interesting. I have no idea what it means.
I mean, if you said you saw every shot hit, you'd also have seen the non-shot that gave Murray the double break in the third.
Yeah, that was incredible. I mean, for reference, yeah, it gave Murray the chance to serve for the match, and it bounced near the baseline, and the way Paul reacted,
just bounced in the middle of the base. He had a pretty straightforward forehand, didn't he? And to get into a rally, and the ball just shot up.
Yeah, it was. As bad bounces go, it was a pretty bad time for a bad bounce. And Murray apologised as it happened, and then they sat down, and they'd been sat down for about 20 seconds, and he just went, "Sorry, Tommy." I was like, mate, I think the moment's passed. You really don't need to apologise again. He also beat Luca Van Asch and Gael Monfils en route to the title. I was having a conversation with Liam Feiler. I actually realised I've never met Liam in person, so I don't know if I've been mispronouncing his surname, but I'm going to go Feiler. And he was saying, is it really worth getting that excited? I know the truth of the matter probably is somewhere between the two, i.e. this being a really important win and this meaning absolutely nothing. But we'd be interested to know what people think. Calvin, you obviously know the Challenger Tour and Andy reasonably well. What do you think this means, if anything?
I mean, it's a little bit different from a Challenger because it's a 175. So they're basically this new level of tournament that was created predominantly for the second weeks of the Masters, where they're not allowed to have any 250s. So I would say it's almost a 250, if not one of, the field there was probably on a par with a lot of the 250s that we get through the year. So I think in that regard, then it is somewhat meaningful. Ranking points a little bit, I suppose, but also I think what's most importantly is for Andy, that he gets to feel that he's won a tournament and he gets some matches in and gets to feel like he can close out tennis matches, which I think has been a problem for him. So I don't think, I saw we had a discussion earlier that someone was saying it was bigger than his Wimbledon's, which might have been tongue-in-cheek, but I don't think it's that. But I also don't think it's nothing, because I think the level of it's not like coming out and winning a 50k challenger where the highest ranked player is 250 in the world. It's a serious challenger, and also, like I said, I think it's important that for Andy to feel like, right, you can see it in his face that it's always interesting with sports people, isn't it? 'Cause you get like when England players score against San Marino, they're don't want to celebrate it. It feels a bit silly celebrating those goals. And I was interested to see how Andy did take it at the end, and he was really happy, but also not overboard. He wasn't falling on his knees. You could see it meant something to him that he'd basically proven to himself that he can still win tennis matches against. And Tommy Paul's a very good player. He can still beat those guys at the top of the game, which is what he's wanting to do. And I think, he's been in some bad form. I don't think it's been anything other than that with Andy recently. Players just have good form and they have bad form. He's been in bad form. It's only now that when you get to that age, you start going, oh, is this the end? Is this the end? But, I was surprised to learn that he's still like 50 in the world with not a whole lot of points to defend. He could get a seed in at Wimbledon, I think.
He's up to 42. He is going to play Rome. It's his highest ranking since hip surgery, I believe. And he is going to play Rome, and then we'll see with the French Open, is what I was told recently. So we will just have to see. Someone said to me, I can't wait to see Ivan Lendl in the box at a challenger. He wasn't there, obviously. It was Judy and Mark Hilton and his physio. Even wasn't going to get off the golf course for the Aix-en-Provence challenger, I'm afraid. But we shall see him. Maybe we'll see him in Rome. There's some good golf courses around there. George, do you think this is significant for Murray?
I mean, it's significant in the context of his year alone, where he was in dreadful form. I mean, it's completely distracted us from what was possibly the worst defeat of his entire career last week. I mean, that was right up there for
Andrea Vavasori.
Awful Andy Murray defeat. So to bounce back at this kind of hybrid event and beat the world number 17, coming back from a set down on a surface you're yet to win on this year, I think you have to take that really positively. And it's interesting you say he's not sure about the French or not. If I were him, I would definitely be getting my hat in that bloody ring and trying to push for this Wimbledon seeding. I think I'm right in saying he had a grass court final, didn't he, last year, where he might have some points dropping off. But if he
got
could
to the final in Stuttgart, Stuttgart against, he lost to Berrettini and injured his ab.
If he can put himself in third, fourth round of the French Open or whatever, you suspect that's probably going to give him a decent chunk, and then picking up a grass title or some decent form on there beforehand, which he's more than capable of. Why not? And this, it's very good news for him. And it's been a bit of a funny year because it felt like a really positive start to the year for him. And then it was starting to sag off, and he was, as Calvin's saying, you start thinking, oh God, is he done? Is he bothered anymore? So for him to go and actually just get his hands on anything right now, beating some quality opposition, I think can only be viewed as positively. One positive from British tennis this week. A week of lows otherwise.
Harriet Dart won the title in Nottingham. You keep forgetting this, George.
Sorry.
And George Lofhagen won the men's, I believe. So some positives there. George, I know you've got better places to be, so I'm going to let you go. Calvin and I will get us home. I've got 2 listener questions for you, Calvin, one of which comes from Eleanor Sordi, a regular listener and questioner, and related to Andy Murray. She says, what was the tipping point in Andy's performance on clay in 2016? I always thought his game is a good fit for clay. The physicality, building up a points, good hands at the net, slices and angles. The early years in Spain probably were pivotal, so why did it not come sooner? It allows me to mention as well that this was Murray's first clay court final since the 2016 French Open final, which is equally remarkable. But what do you think, Calvin? What got him there on clay, and why didn't it come earlier?
I mean, it's not that it came out of the blue. He had a few semis and that kind of thing, and he'd been. Well,
and he won the Rome title before.
Yeah, he wouldn't. Yeah, he didn't. I'd say the tipping point was he didn't come across Nadal earlier, Nadal or Djokovic earlier. So, but yeah, he was good. He was a good tennis player. He was in 2016. He was the best tennis player in the world as well.
Yeah. But he did, I mean, French Open was his last final, if you like. Like, he got there latest compared to, obviously, the US and Wimbledon and Australia. And it's always kind of confused me that he obviously went to the Sanchez Academy in Barcelona and spent a couple of years there and would have spent a lot of...
He wasn't there as much as made out,
Right.
Kind of sold that he went there and trained, and that's where he was based full time. He did various trips there. And trained there amongst other places. And being that he was one of the best players in the world at his age, he was on the road a lot. But it's kind of oversold that he went there, and it's always sold that he didn't go down the LTA route. He went down, which there's no such thing as the LTA route, by the way, and never has been. and he went and did that. But that's just one of the places he went. A lot of players do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting what she says about his game being quite well suited to it. I suppose it is, and you always say that clay is one of the best teachers there is. But I hope that answers your question anyway. I've got one more question for you, Calvin. It's a bit of a rogue one, but it's interesting. Errol Samuel on Twitter asks, what do the players check for when they receive the balls to pick before they serve?
They want the newest balls. They want the ones that are fluffed up the least. So that's because they fly through the air quicker and give them a little bit more on serve, and it's marginal, but that's what they want. So they're always basically looking for the one that has the least wear on it, and by least wear you mean the one that's fluffed up the least through a lot of hitting.
Is there any rope in like saving the better one for second serve? Like when you need a bit more, like would anyone ever do that?
I mean, I used to be fair on second serve. No, I'd get an older one because you're going to hit it with more spin. You want a bit more traction through the air and that kind of thing. So you want a heavier ball for a second serve. So, and also the flip side of that is that if you think they're going to get a good hit on it, if they're going to get a good hit on it anyway, you probably want a slower ball anyway. But it depends what kind. I imagine John Isner's just wanting two rapid ones, but peak Calvin Betton in 1997 was trying to find. I was there in the pocket doing a bit of Aussie cricket style ball cap,
spitting on it,
anything
giving
to get
it
an
to
extra
the dog.
edge. Yeah, I mean, I've even seen players like try and find an old ball behind the curtain and try and serve with that. But,
Brilliant.
But no, I mean the new balls do play a big part, and it's especially it's I guess since I've coached more and more on challengers and main tour, you realise what a big difference it makes because they come every 7 and 9. In futures tournaments, they come like every 11 and 13, so they're just knackered for ages. But it's key how many times players are broken serving with the last game of new balls. Last game of the old balls, sorry. Yeah.
I do remember you telling me about that. I think it was in Germany, a future where, because obviously, as you say, they change balls less often, and the first set took an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I mean, that must be soul-destroying.
You're playing with the same, but this is where I'm maintain that tennis balls should be changed on a time period and not over games. It's less so in doubles, like doubles where I coach most of my coaching now, because it's sudden death deuce. So you've kind of time constrained there. But like the other day, I mean, I don't know whether anyone saw it on. There was a match in Sardinia where I was between Humbert and Taro Daniel, and the match lasted 4 hours 15 minutes. The first two sets of that lasted 3 hours 13 minutes.
Oh my God!
For the first, so you can imagine how long those balls were in play for every 7 and 9 games on a clay court, and that's that's just not good enough for me. That they had the same amount of ball changes as you would have if it was 7-6, 6-7, 6-4, I think, 7-5 maybe.
Sounds right.
And they, that match could easily have had that scoreline and lasted 2 hours 30 minutes and still would have had the same amount of ball changes.
Yeah. Crazy. Right, I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you as always for your time, Calvin, and George, although he's not here anymore. Please do leave us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. Please do tell your friends. Find us on Twitter @unfilteredtennis. If you've got questions, you can ask them there or email us, tennisunfiltered@gmail.com. But most importantly, please do come back next week.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Sports Social Podcast Network.